People with thin walls, what have you overheard in your apartment? Before we start, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. Two college-aged women lived above me, and my roommate and I could hear everything through the floor. Literally everything. One of the women was particularly loud, especially during late-night activities, often at 4 or 5 a.m., which was really frustrating since I had to work early most days. One night, fed up, I stood on my bed and banged on the ceiling with my shoe, asking them to quiet down. The noise stopped, but then the conversation began. The guy with her said, "Did you hear that? I think someone was talking to us." The girl dismissed it, saying, "Nah, the dude downstairs is probably just watching TV." I thought, "I'm talking to you. Please keep it down. I need to work in a couple of hours." Then another guy chimed in, "He's definitely talking to us." The girl insisted, "No, he isn't." At that point, I realized, wait, there are two guys? And then a third guy added, "No, there are three of us." I totally get that feeling about noisy neighbors. If you're going to be loud, good for you, but at least keep it to hours when I can turn up my TV instead of when most people are trying to sleep. Story 2. Been a few years ago, but the family living next to me had a daughter, and her mom walked in on her lying face down in the bathroom floor, trying to take a picture of either her bottom or kitty, or both, to send to some guy she met online. I know all of these details because the mom shouted at the dad when he got home from work and berated the daughter for hours. I ate my supper cold because I didn't want to make microwave noise in the kitchen because mom was on a roll and it was pretty crazy. Ate a cold supper to keep eavesdropping. That's hysterical. Story 3. I lived next to a guy who cared for his disabled girlfriend. While he worked to support them and cover her healthcare costs, she stayed home with a nurse. Everyone admired him for his dedication. However, he would sometimes get drunk and get mad at her for not loving him enough, saying if she didn't start being more intimate, he'd kick her out. Wow, that got grim real fast. I was hoping for something nice, but now it feels like I hit a solid wall. Story 4. In my old apartment, the layout was such that the neighbor's bedroom was right next to my kitchen and dining area. One night, while I was fixing dinner, I heard them banging. Thin walls make everything sound louder when the bed hits the wall. I just turned up the music and carried on. A couple of hours later, while I was tidying up and doing the dishes, I heard that familiar thump, thump, thump again. I thought it was good for them and bagged up the trash to take it out. As I opened the door, I saw a guy from the neighboring apartment walking in from his car. On my way back from the dumpster, I spotted a half-dressed dude sprinting out of their apartment. They moved out shortly after that. Story 5. My upstairs neighbors were a single mom and her teenage daughter, and they were quite loud. The mom's room was directly above mine. One day, when I had the day off, I was awakened by the usual noise from upstairs, which had become common over the past few weeks. This time, however, someone burst in and began screaming, "You're having sex in my bed?" It turned out the daughter had been skipping school and sneaking with her boyfriend into the apartment. They were the ones doing it in the mom's bed. The ensuing argument was so dramatic that both women could have easily won awards for their performances. Story 6. X and I heard neighbors going at it, younger couple around our age. Their bedroom against our bedroom layouts are mirrored. We laughed really hard about it at first. Then it got really annoying. So we basically started making all the bed noises at the same time they did. After about a couple months of making the noises to them, I ran into the neighbor getting mail, and we both cracked up hard. Came to find out they had heard us doing it first and started making noises, which we thought was them doing it. So for the past few months, the four of us were literally lying in bed making weird noises at each other through the walls. Story 7. My Chinese neighbor sings to someone through the phone about 3 nights a week. I don't know what he is saying, but it sounds like he really loves whoever it is he is singing to. I don't really get annoyed by it because I think it's a pretty sweet thing to do. It's to the point now that if I don't hear singing for a while, I get a little worried about him. I've seen him on the balcony a few times and once in his car in the parking lot. That's how I know he is singing into his phone. Story 8. My next-door neighbor frequently broke up with her boyfriend, which led to loud, tearful phone calls with her friends late at night. Once, a friend even called the police out of concern for her safety. I happened to be walking home as the officers arrived, and they mistook me for her at first. They ended up in her apartment, talking for about 30 minutes about love, medication, and the importance of resilience after a breakup. The officer was really great, but I overheard way more than I wanted to. Nothing romantic went down between her or the cop. He was a sweet, fatherly kind of guy who gave a sad young girl a patient ear when she was upset. She's now back with the BF, and their relationship became healthier. After, I assume, she took the cop's advice to heart. Story 9. I've come to the unsettling conclusion that my neighbor likely abuses his wife. It wasn't just the late-night arguments that led me to this. Sure, there was the incident where she locked him out and he attempted to break down the door, or the time 4 different neighbors called the cops because they were screaming at each other for nearly an hour. No, what truly cemented my impression was the night they completely lost it and were arguing all night. I even kept the audio recording as evidence for the police. Holy F, I hope she gets out of that horrible relationship. Story 10. My neighbor's daughter got caught sending inappropriate photos of her on Facebook, and wow, did her mom let her have it. I've never heard a yelling match like that. I turned off everything in my apartment and practically pressed my ear against the wall to catch every word. It was intense. Story 11. The single apartment next door has its bedroom up against the living room wall of the 2-bedroom a friend and I share. And what is the TV wall on our side is where everyone who ever moves in next door puts their bed. Once, a very attractive young couple moved in, and just about every night they'd be hammering the metal headboard, you could tell, off the wall as we watched TV. We'd be sitting in our comfy chairs and mentally pleading for him to come already. Story 12. Last Christmas, I heard my neighbor getting really mad at her son. The little boy was screaming, begging his mom to stop. She just kept yelling, "It's your daddy's fault. Go tell him to pay his child support." I called the cops who contacted CPS, and now I am public enemy number 1 in my apartment complex. Everyone hates me for going to the police. What the frigging hell? And what a piece of turd of a mother she is. He did the right thing calling the cops. Sometimes it is much easier to ignore than to intervene. Also, I don't understand why everyone would hate him for saving a little boy's life. Story 13 years ago, I lived in an apartment with the thinnest walls imaginable. I could hear everything, and my neighbor and his girlfriend were definitely lively. One day I thought to myself, her voice sounds different. Uh-oh. Sure enough, the next day the girlfriend came over and they had a massive fight. I have no idea how she found out, but she figured it out pretty quickly. Story 14. My neighbor, the cop, is way too nosy. The kids living above me frequently threw parties, complete with loud music and drunken yelling. He thought it was me, convinced that my RF/DC shirt, a parody of the AC/DC logo for science, was enough evidence. One night, he called the cops on me during one of their bashes. I answered the door in my Star Wars pajamas to 2 visibly awkward officers. They took one look at me, apologized, and explained the mix-up. Later, I found out it was my neighbor who had gotten in my face about the noise. Turns out it was just my sewing machine at 2 in the afternoon. Story 15. My neighbors loved to get really high and whip up crazy late-night snacks, and they were always loud about it. One night, as I walked by, I overheard an amusing exchange. "Dude, yes. And then put some freaking cheese in it, dude. You mean stuff it inside the bell pepper? Heck yes, and then put that shit in the oven." This was followed by some loud moaning, which made the whole scene even more entertaining. Story 16. In college, I lived in a rundown apartment near campus, mostly filled with students. One day, halfway to class, I realized I had forgotten a book and had to rush back. As I dashed up the stairs, which shared a wall with the stairwell of the neighboring apartment, I thought I heard yelling. I brushed it off and hurried to my room. On my way back down, I heard the yelling again and paused to listen. It was followed by some incoherent moaning, and then I distinctly heard "help me" weakly coming from next door. I hurried outside and tried their door, but it was locked. Forgetting about my class entirely, I sprinted to the apartment management office, relieved to find a manager there. After explaining the situation, she grabbed her master keys and we rushed back to the neighbor's apartment. She unlocked the door to find a guy lying in the stairwell, having clearly fallen. I called 911 while she attended to him. The ambulance arrived and took him away. Later, I found out he had fallen after slipping into a brief diabetic coma, apparently from not eating for some time. I didn't know much about diabetes then. Looking back, I'm grateful I forgot that book. That poor guy could have been in serious trouble, slumped halfway down the stairs. I was thankful for the thin walls, just for that moment. Otherwise, they really are a pain. Story 17. My old neighbor was a cam girl, and I could hear absolutely everything she said in every single session for a good 4 months. Pretty much learned the names of her clients. I work from home, and it was always a gamble whenever I had to meet with someone virtually. Story 18. I once overheard a former roommate laughing with his girlfriend about how they were screwing me over financially. It turned out they were using my share of the utility bill to buy games and alcohol. Instead of confronting them, I verified their claims with the utility company and discovered they hadn't paid the bill in 2 months. That same day, while they were at work, I moved all my stuff out. To cover my bases, I also removed myself from the lease and informed them about the girlfriend who had been living there for 6 months. It took them a month to realize I was gone, basically when they tried to take my money again. I received several angry voicemails and texts until I finally told them I was blocking both of them. The last I heard from mutual friends was that he and the girlfriend broke up soon after, and she ended up claiming my old room because they couldn't afford to move out. Story 19. My downstairs neighbors are a couple with a 1-year-old boy, and his room is right beneath mine. They speak to him so lovingly that I don't even mind hearing them clearly. One morning, I heard the dad go in to get the baby out of bed asking, "Can you say daddy? Can you say daddy?" Then, in the tiniest little voice, I heard him respond with daddy. My heart just melted. So good to hear a story about good parents instead of the countless shitty parent stories I've heard. Story 20. 20 years ago, I had an upstairs neighbor who was quite the character. Every night at 2 a.m., I would hear something racing across the entire apartment. I noticed 3 things. It moved incredibly fast, took small strides, and never veered off course. One day, I bumped into my neighbor outside and asked, "How do you have energy at 2 a.m.?" He replied, "Dude, I've been working the midnight to 8 a.m. shift for 15 years. It doesn't bother me at all." That night, I watched him leave, then waited 2 hours. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like 2 feet hitting the floor in his bedroom, and the marathon began. A few weeks later, I saw him outside again and mentioned the noise at night. He looked puzzled and said, "That's strange. No one else has my keys. It's just me and my rabbit up there. My friend had a rabbit that did that." My theory is that the bunny gets upset a couple of hours after Dad leaves and starts stomping around to show its frustration. Then, it goes on a wild, zooming adventure around the apartment while Dad's away. If it gets really mad, it might chew through the wires behind the entertainment center and then leap up to leave little surprises on your bed. Story 21. My upstairs neighbors were taking turns zapping each other with a stun gun, crashing to the floor, groaning in pain, and then laughing like Beavis and Butthead. Story 22. I manage an apartment complex where my office is nestled next to a 1-bedroom unit. The building is old and the walls are thin. The previous tenant was a quiet man, but he often filled the halls with his beautiful opera singing. His voice was incredible, and I loved hearing him perform. One day, I ran into him in the hallway, and thinking it would be nice to compliment him, I asked if he was the one singing those lovely opera pieces. His face turned bright red, but he admitted it was him. I told him how much I enjoyed it, and how it always brightened my day. I shouldn't have said anything because after that, I never heard him sing again. Story 23. I've heard and felt the neighbors upstairs going at it, and apparently they like to rearrange the furniture at least twice a week. Story 24. I overheard the couple next door arguing. The wife was livid after discovering he had been cheating on her, especially since she found out she had chlamydia. He attempted to convince her that she must have been the one unfaithful. She still lives there. He doesn't. Story 25. We stopped at a hotel for the night on a road trip and didn't realize how awful it was until we arrived. Since we were only going to be there 12 hours total, we decided just to stay. Oh man, this one woman would start screaming and arguing with someone else, talking in a calm voice. Every 30 minutes to an hour, she'd calm down, and then suddenly, she'd be screaming again. Never again. Story 26. In our old apartment, our upstairs neighbor had incredibly loud, theatrically enthusiastic in the middle of the day. What puzzled us was that he would frequently pause, walk to the bathroom, linger there for a minute or two, and then return to resume in the bedroom. It was the same routine every time. We could never figure out what that was all about. Story 27. I moved from out of state, so my license plate is different from everyone else's in the apartment complex. A couple of days ago, I overheard my upstairs neighbor drunkenly ranting to his wife about what he thinks I'm up to. He's convinced I'm on the run from something. Meanwhile, I'm just in grad school, LMAO. Story 28. I overheard an argument about money while I was doing the dishes. It ended with a slammed door and one of them sitting at the piano banging on the keys like a madman. Some people read, some grab a snack, some hit the gym. This guy relieves stress by going wild on a piano. Loyal. Story 29. There was a lot happening in my apartment complex. I often heard my presumably constipated neighbor struggling to poop, which involved 5 minutes of grunting and heavy breathing. Then, there was the snoring from another unit, sounding like a diesel truck revving its engine. For a while, a little girl practiced what I assumed was violin every night. At one point, someone blasted Middle Eastern music. I even Shazammed it and found out the song was called Mundian Tubak K. Apparently the song is Indian, not Middle Eastern. I honestly had no idea. And there were unsettling sounds of a woman who seemed to be forcing herself to vomit, accompanied by crying. I couldn't tell if she had food poisoning, was bulimic, or something else entirely. And a lot of lovemaking. Story 30. I lived next to a couple some years ago, and they came home after a night out and started fighting about who was better at darts. I thought they were joking, but it got pretty heated. Doors were slammed. From what I could tell, they were playing darts at the bar earlier that night. They were playing as a team and the boyfriend wasn't pulling his weight and was super defensive about it. He had an off night, allegedly. The girlfriend was mad. He couldn't accept she was better. I'm no detective, but think they had some relationship issues bigger than darts. Story 31. When I was an older teenager, I had a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood and a volatile gang member for a boyfriend. We would often have loud fights, prompting my downstairs neighbor to call the police. One time, after a particularly bad fight that turned physical, I was quietly crying when I overheard her arguing with her husband. She said, "No, I'm not going to mind my own business and ignore it. I don't care that he always comes back the next day and she forgives him. One day, he's really going to hurt her or kill her, and I can't just sit here knowing that I did nothing while a girl was being abused." I was young and naive, in love, but completely unaware, and I had never thought of it as abuse. At the time, it felt melodramatic, but I eventually realized she was right. I finally left him for good after that fight. So, thank you, random lady in East LA in 1999, for looking out. I'm sorry for being such a terrible neighbor. What a great, upstanding neighbor. And good for the writer. She seems to have grown from that terrible experience and how it ultimately led her to a healthier path. Her journey can inspire others who might find themselves in similar situations. Story 32. I used to live in a sketchy building where my landlord lived right beneath me. My landlord was mid-50s, not attractive, and just overall a creepy guy. He always just gave me bad vibes, even if what he was saying was innocuous. He was a strange guy, and there were all sorts of rumors about him while I was there, but I tried to dismiss them as gossip. The neighborhood had a lot of homeless people, which didn't bother anyone. They were just part of the community, and many residents knew them. Often, they would hang out on our front stoop, and it was never a big deal. I frequently heard knocks that sounded like they were coming from the windows instead of the front door. I'd rush over to see who it was, but I could never catch anyone in time. One night, while I was in bed, I heard knocking again. It seemed to be coming from the window right below me on the left. When I looked down, I saw one of the regular homeless guys and my landlord opening the door to let him in. As I lay there, trying to make sense of it, I clearly heard the homeless man say, "I need something to eat. I was just wondering if you needed a back rub or something." That's when I realized all the rumors I had brushed off about my landlord were actually true. So he basically offered food for sex? What a low life. People can choose to have sex with whomever they wish, but things would be quite different if the playing fields were more equal. Story 33. My ex-neighbors never let their kids leave the house and preferred to raise bubble children. The older son, 12 or 13, was pitifully fragile. One day I heard him crying because he shit on his own hands. Story 34. The people above me start doing it at exactly 1 p.m. every day. I'm usually not home at that time, but when I am, it's frustrating. Their bed is incredibly squeaky and it's so loud it feels like it's happening in my own room. Everyone in the apartment can hear it. They really need to invest in a better bed frame or something. Story 35. I heard my roommates doing it very loudly. I didn't say anything at the moment, but sat them down the next day and talked about it. Turns out the boyfriend was at work during the time it happened. Story 36. I heard my neighbors going at it when I lived in my previous apartment. Our bedrooms shared a wall. This in itself is not unusual. It was like, "Give me your effing baby. Make me pregnant, daddy." It's those sounds waking me up at 2 a.m. that killed my soul. Story 37. My neighbor worked a lot and had recently hired a new sitter. One day, I overheard her inviting 2 guys over while the kids, only 3 and 1, were home. I heard her say, "If we leave for the corner store now, the kids will be fine alone for 20 minutes. And then they started discussing popping some of Mom's Xanax to sell. Shortly after they left, I stepped outside, knocked on the door, and the 3-year-old boy came out. I called the police, went into the apartment, and found the mom's work number by the sink. She was furious when I contacted her. She left work and came home. And just as she was walking up to thank me and the officers, the babysitter and the guys returned. Mind you, this was all within an hour, not the 20 minutes she claimed. The mom ended up confronting the babysitter, and then she called the sitter's mom, who also gave her a good talking to. After that, I was even offered a sitting job myself and took it, ironically. I've also heard one of my other neighbors talking in tongues and yodeling. I'm really glad I don't live in an apartment anymore. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.